You're earning more than your parents ever did, yet somehow you still feel behind. Today's guest spent 25 years inside the financial system as an SEC examiner, and he says the problem isn't your income, it's that nobody ever taught you how wealth actually works. Hey, everybody, welcome back to Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty Network. This is your host, John Odermatt, back with you for another great episode. Happy to have you with me today. Before we launch into today's show, I got to talk about something new with you. We have a new sponsor on the show, longtime friend of mine, Jason Gagne. He's been a guest on this show, and he has a new fitness program that was built for people just like you. If you're somebody maybe around my age, you're reaching middle age, and your body isn't quite exactly what you want it to be, then I have an answer for you. And the systems and the workouts you did in the past, if you failed, if you quit, that's not your fault. Jason has addressed why people quit and built a program that helps people to keep going. It's Good to Go Body. It's a 90-day program specifically designed for beginners to focus on consistency over intensity so you can build real strength without burning out or getting hurt. Push-ups, squats, burpees, sit-ups. Master the basics and build a body that's ready for anything. Like I said, Jason's a good friend of mine. We think alike on a lot of things. He's an awesome guy who has helped thousands of people to build strength and to rebuild or regain their flexibility. So you can order his 90-day program and save $100 off of it if you use the link in the description, either wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching this video, or you can go to the show notes page at lionsofliberty.com. All right, let's get into today's show. And my guest today, Edward Brady. Edward is a CFA licensed realtor and chartered retirement planning counselor with more than 25 years in financial oversight, including time as an SEC examiner reviewing hundreds of financial institutions. He's the author of a new book, Awaken Your Financial Star. It's a framework-driven guide that's going to be coming out in July of this year. It breaks down how savings, time, assets, and returns actually work together to build real, lasting financial independence. Ed, welcome to Find Your Freedom.
Thank you, John. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And also, just a quick disclosure. One, it's a chartered financial analyst, and the views expressed today are really my own views and not that of eXp Realty or my other or former affiliations. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think it's a great opportunity to share some of the ideas of the book. Hopefully, people will get some great ideas, and ultimately, read the book.
Yeah, so let's kind of dive right into it. Let's not waste any time. So, I've often talked to people, and they say, public schools don't teach about personal finance. They don't teach us how to. I don't think anyone really balances a checkbook much anymore. A lot of that is done digitally, but they don't teach you savings and investing and the power of that. It's just kind of something that either you learn on your own or your parents teach you. So where do you think? Why do you think so many people feel financially behind when they're really people are earning a lot more, and of course there's inflation. But people are earning more than their parents, and I think it feels like the jobs people have, they're doing well, but people just can't get ahead.
Right. And you really touched on one of the main culprits, and that is inflation. And so inflation's been with us for a long time, from all the way from Roman times to modern day. Governments have inflated currencies, and I don't think that they're going to stop. But there's another hidden culprit, and it's really self-inflicted, and that is lifestyle creep. We earn more and then we want to spend more. We buy the nicer car, we buy the nicer house, but it's kind of like being on a treadmill. You run faster and faster, but really you're stuck in the same spot. And so there's two stories that I really like to tell, and I share them in the book. And one is a story of Sylvia Bloom. And Sylvia Bloom was a legal secretary that built an $8 million fortune over a lifetime of saving and investing.
Mhm.
And by investing in equities and imitating the strategies of the attorneys that she worked for. And by contrast, Warren Sapp was an NFL star. And Warren Sapp earned $75 million over his career, but ultimately filed bankruptcy. And I really think that drives home a very powerful lesson, which is it's more important what we keep and how we use that
Mm.
than actually how much money is flowing through our hands.
Yeah, and so many people, I think, don't have a plan for the money once it comes in. I know I've fallen into this trap in the past where I don't have a salaried job now. I'm an entrepreneur, but where you have your salaried job and you get paid, either every week or twice a month, and you have your mortgage and your car payment and your utilities, and things just kinda happen. The money comes in and then it just runs right back out of your account. So let's dig into, what are some things that people can do to be, aware of and to be proactive in savings and in protecting the money they're making?
Okay, that's a great question. And there are several things that I think people can do in general. And one is really being aware of what's going on, really paying attention to your finances, what's going in, what's going out. Certain things can benefit too. Like I know with my rental properties, rental properties can be a very low margin business. So one thing I've done is to use credit cards that offer rebates. So that improves the margin sometimes as much as two, or if you get really lucky, you can even do better than that. But 2%, 1% to 2% is reasonable. And so that's a quick idea right there on how someone might be able to improve margins in a business per se.
Mhm.
But another thing that I think is really key is people that are employed. There's sometimes opportunities that, especially when you're young, you're not thinking are really that important. Like employer matches is a huge one, where it's an opportunity to save more without actually having to save more because it's provided by the employer.
You're talking about like a 401k match?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, and I mean, so with that, because I've done that in the past and, built up my 401k, and something that I've seen talked about a lot is people converting their IRA. If you have a 401k and then say you leave your employer, you can convert that then into an IRA. So people over time converting their IRA into a Roth IRA in order to reduce their tax hit. Because something that I've heard talked about is what can happen with a 401k or with an IRA. Um, Once you get to retirement age, there's a certain age where you have to start drawing down, where you have to start taking distributions, I should say. And those distributions are going to be on top of, if you're still working at that time, on top of the income you're already making. So you're going to be taxed at an extremely high rate, right? Sure, at the time that you got paid, when it came out of your paycheck, there was no tax. But when you end up taking it out, you're going to be getting taxed potentially, if you're still working, especially at a very high income.
That's right. Yeah, so you can think of a traditional IRA is like an insurance policy, if you will. So insurance policy that you're not going to run out of money. And a Roth IRA, which is kind of what you're alluding to, is a wealth building tool. You're going to have more money because when the money comes out, it's not taxed. And
Mhm.
actually, you're contributing more because the money is already taxed when it goes in. So if you have, like, say, you're going to contribute 4,000, let's say. So effectively, with the Roth, you've contributed more when it goes in, and when it comes out, it's going to be more. So the Roth is a very powerful wealth building tool, and the IRA is more like an insurance tool and an immediate deduction. So if you are making a very, very high income and you anticipate that to go down after retirement, then the traditional IRA might be better. But if you anticipate, like your business owner, like yourself, and you anticipate that income may continue to rise, like royalties and et cetera, and then the Roth may be better because maybe you're in a
Mhm.
low tax bracket now, but you expect that income to rise, or rentals properties, for example, then the Roth IRA may be a better opportunity for you. It's actually one of the first analysis I ever did. Actually did it for my dad before I even started with the SEC, was trying to analyze, oh, what's better to
Mhm.
have a traditional or the Roth?
So, to kinda backtrack a little bit, we kinda jumped right into it. Now we're gonna go back to your background a little bit. So 25 years working for the SEC, right? How did you find your way into that role?
Okay, well, I actually started with the military, and I had in my 20s, I kinda went through some rough times, and I decided, okay, I had a son coming, and I decided I needed to do something. What I was doing wasn't working, so I decided I was gonna join the military. My grandfather had been in the military. I saw it as a potential career path, and ultimately, my goal was I was gonna join law enforcement, or I was gonna join the fire department when I came back from reserve training. And when I came back, I was looking for a government job. And so the officers that were helping me uh, prepare my officer application kind of encouraged me to look for a different government job. So I was looking through the phone book and I saw the SEC. I was like, oh, well, I studied finance. That kind of fits. So I applied. Ultimately, I got the job, and that was it. I really felt like the mission was something that fit. I really felt passionate about protecting investors, and having the finance background. It is a topic that I was interested. It was something that I was good at. And so immediately when I did the interview, I was like, oh, I really can see myself staying here for 20 years. And so I stayed 25, and it ended up being a really good fit for me.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's pivot now and talk about the book a little bit. And you talk about the STAR method: saving, time horizon, asset selection, real returns. What does this actually mean in plain terms?
Okay. Well, the core concept of STAR is savings, time, assets, and real returns. And so if you break down finance or future value formulas, pretty much all of them have the same components. So they have savings, if they're annuity, time, the exponential piece, assets, what you're trying to build, so productive assets, and the real returns, the portion that you actually keep.
Mhm.
And so the idea behind the book was really to help people understand why they're doing stuff. So instead of just do this, I really wanted people to be able to think for themselves instead of necessarily relying on an expert that was going to tell them what's in their best interest. It's the primary thing that I wished I could have told people for those 25 years, say, hey, this is what you should do. But like Benjamin Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So that's the idea behind the book. I want people to think for themselves, and really, like Occam's razor for an engineer. We're going to bring it down to the very basics,
Mhm.
and then you're going to build from there. And so here's a great example. So you're starting your career, right? You've got some income, but you've got no savings or very little, and you've got no assets. So what's the biggest uh, piece that's missing? Is the savings and assets, right? So what if that young person, maybe they're fresh out of the military or whatever, they use an FHA or a VA loan and they bought a 4 unit building. Now you've got a fairly large asset that's compounding. You've got some additional income and you've reduced your housing expense. So that's just one idea, for example, of how distilling down to the very basics might help you come up with creative ideas that will solve your problems or your specific issues that you're encountering towards reaching financial freedom.
Hmm. So which of these four do you think that people either misunderstand or underestimate the most out of savings, time horizon, assets, and real returns?
I think time by far. And the reason that is because we always overestimate what we can achieve in the short term, but in the long term, we tend to underestimate what we can achieve. And I think Warren Buffett's life is a fantastic example of this. He didn't get rich quick; he got rich slow. And so, if you're familiar with his life, he started when he was like 11 investing, and 99% of his wealth was built after age 50. And that's pretty incredible when you
It
think about
is.
it. And so I like the metaphor of bamboo. So if you think of ourselves, we are the bamboo. Bamboo grows for years underground. You don't even see it. And then in one season, it shoots up, like 50, 90 feet or whatever it grows. And so if you think about compound interest is very similar, or if you think about how your wealth grows, that's the way it is. It may feel boring at first. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything. Doesn't feel like you're making any progress, but you kind of have to stick with it, have that discipline and persistence so that in the long run you can get those big gains.
Hmm. Do you think that advice is different than financial advisors typically give out?
Do I think that's different? That segment of the advice can be different, but it is not necessarily different. So the core concept of star is that it's kind of timeless. So these concepts have been around since Babylonian times, 2000 BC, basically. There's a stone tablet at the Louvre that talks about like how long does it take for a loan to double, for example. But the thing that's really different is that I want people to understand why. And I believe that if you understand why, then it makes it easier to stick with the idea of what you're doing, be persistent, be disciplined. But there are certain parts of the book that are very different. And so, for example, I spent an entire chapter talking about fraud defense. And so it was one of the things I felt very passionate about having worked for the SEC for so long, and so there are certain things that people can do to protect themselves against fraud. For one, is just being skeptical. You
Mhm.
look at an investment, kick the tires. If it's still if it still passes the scrutiny test, then you might have a good one. Another basic protection is who's the custodian or the escrow for your investment? Are they independent from the person that you're employing? And so that's really key. If you think about, like, for example, Bernie Madoff, he was the custodian, right? And so that was a key
Mm.
risk that if you had said, okay, I'm not going to, like, say to use this rule, I'm not going to invest with anybody who's the custodian. I'm only going to invest investments where a third party is the custodian, for example. Just a idea. Then all of a sudden that investment got totally taken off the table, right? So that's one idea. And so another concept is, are you hiring a fiduciary? So fiduciary is really somebody who's legally bound to look after your interests. And so that's another idea that I talk about there. But I use a lot of stories rather than math to try to convey concepts. And so one of the stories that I really liked was to convey the benefits of real estate. And so
Mhm.
how, for example, I had a landlord in my 20s. and they pulled out $30 million from the rental properties in Los Angeles. And it took a second for me to that really click that what that meant. So they pulled out $30 million tax free because loans are not taxable, right? And it makes sense when you think about it, but we don't necessarily think about, oh, well, that's a benefit of real estate. And so just simple things like that are throughout the book. And so I use a lot of stories of various billionaires to drive home different concepts in the book. And so I think that it's kind of a core concept of how a lot of us learn. And
Mhm.
so I tried to make it very accessible. So it's not necessarily that these concepts are completely unique, but I tried to do it in such a way that it's accessible to everyone.
That makes a lot of sense, and I mean, I agree with you on real estate. I work in real estate now. I'm not a realtor, and I don't own any properties at this time, but, typically what I mostly do is wholesale,
Oh,
real
okay.
estate. But it's interesting doing talking to a lot of, investors and sellers and buyers. It's interesting how many people you come across who buy properties at a price and at rents that they don't cash flow. Or they maybe they do cash flow a little bit, but they don't actually, build any savings where if you have a furnace go out or if you have a leaky roof or whatever, you don't have the money to actually repair it. So I do love the idea of people buying real estate, but it's just surprised me how many people who buy real estate don't go through the due diligence of actually ensuring it's a good deal.
Right. And I've actually, for my personal portfolio, I build a simple spreadsheet that kind of does that. And so basically, you're just taking the rent, vacancy factor,
Mhm.
expenses, capital expenditures, and so on, and making sure that your net cash flow is positive. And generally, I won't buy anything unless it does cash flow. But I know I have a friend who's been quite successful, and he doesn't do that at all. He
Hmm.
buys a property, he moves in, he uses as much leverage as possible, and then they just basically turn them into rentals when they move to the next one.
Okay.
So that is risky, and you kinda keyed into it in that if it doesn't cash flow, you're really relying on those rents to increase to
Mhm.
eventually make it cash flow, and generally with enough time, that's the case, and or you're generating the appreciation, and while you live there, it's not much of an issue because it is your housing expense, right? You gotta live somewhere. Um, but I do think there are ways to accelerate that process. So, for one, we talked about buying a multi-unit building, for example, and
Mhm.
so by doing that, now you've shifted some of your living expenses potentially to the tenant. So you could apply those concepts and still live in the building that you are renting in part.
Mhm. That makes sense.
Mhm.
And I said I don't own real estate now. I do. I own the house I live in, but I guess I forget about that.
Right,
Um,
and that's for many people one of the
mhm,
best investments that they ever make, and so that's one of the things that really why I like real estate is, 1, it's a hedge against inflation,
mhm,
and 2, you can use leverage, and a lot of people, when they're comparing real estate, for example, to equities, they don't take into account those other benefits. They're just looking
mhm.
at, "Oh, well, equities have appreciated more," and that if you just look at it at a surface level, that's true, but when you take into the other accounts and the other benefits of real estate, then it starts to look more interesting.
Yeah, that's just looking at just one piece of real estate, like you said.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I'm
Right.
I'm cur I'm curious to get your view on the market, currently as we sit today. This is for people maybe listening to this later. This is, April of 2026. A lot of people, I go on X from time to time. I always regret when I do normally, and you'll see different charts that show that we're at the highest valuation right now, and people are calling for a crash. Personally, I don't think any major crash is coming for a couple different reasons. I look at, you have more than 50% of the homes out there, um, people don't have a mortgage, and then of that remaining 50%, like something like 50 to 60%, they have a mortgage rate less than 4%. So I really don't see a motivation for a major like 2008 like crash. What are your thoughts on the market as a whole?
Well, I think that from historical standpoints, it's always difficult to predict a short-term crash versus trying to predict what assets will do best for a specific investment horizon. And so in the book, I tried to steer away from saying specific tactics, but really looking more of what could I say for sure. And so one of the analysis I did in preparing to write the book was I compared different asset classes to different investment horizons. And so what I found is that if you were to look at equities and real estate, yes, there were times where from 1 to 5 years, it would have been a really bad investment. You could have
Mhm.
lost 50%, like you pointed out in, 2000, 2008, for example, right? And so where the real risk comes in investment is mismatching horizons with appropriate asset categories. And so that's one of the things I talk about
Mm.
in the return section of the book is look, if this is a long-term investment, then perhaps real estate and stocks is the right place to be. So you got a 10-year horizon or longer, clearly, from a risk to reward standpoint, that's where you want to be. And if you are like, I'm going to need this money in the next 1 to 5 years, then money markets are probably the best place to be, or short term bonds, or someplace like that. So I try to steer clear of making predictions of, okay, in the next 3 years, what's going to be the best asset class as far as these longer term assets?
Mhm.
Because, if you're wrong, you can be really wrong. But if you say, I'm going to match appropriate investment to investment appropriate investment horizon, now you're much less likely to have that kind of problem and have to worry about, oh, we're in a bubble. Well, it turned out not to be a bubble because now hyperinflation kicked in, right? And real estate ended up being the best place you could have possibly been.
Mhm.
Or equities with pricing power ended up being the best place you could have been, right? But they look expensive in a historical sense, but you just don't necessarily know because you can't predict. I can't predict the future, and I've giving up that idea that I could predict the future has really kind of changed the way I look at investments. Now I look at, is this a good opportunity? Is there a good cash flow? Is there potential for growth?
Mhm.
And if I've got those two pieces, and as a percentage, like for example, it's got a 5% yield and I expect 5% growth historically year over year. Okay, now that's starting to look pretty good. But if now all of a sudden the yield is 2% and it's looking like, oh, there's no growth here, now all of a sudden that looks like a bad investment. So I look at more of like, what does it look for cash flow wise and growth wise rather than trying to predict what the short term price fluctuation is going to be?
Yeah, well, that's smart. Not trying to predict any market because it's tough to do, and almost nobody ever gets it right. I'm curious. So, working for the SEC for 25 years, reviewing hundreds of institutions, looking at the behavior of real investors at the regulatory level. What surprised you most about how ordinary people make financial decisions?
Oh, okay. Well, I can't speak to generally everyone, but I can talk about some of the mistakes that I saw people making, I guess. And so I think that where risk really comes in is not necessarily volatility per se, but maybe trusting the wrong people or investing in the
Mhm.
wrong product. And so I would say that, like I said before, being skeptical, using independent custodians or using fiduciaries is one of the best things you can do. And so So, for example, um, sometimes I would see people invest with brokers that had a lot of complaints, for example. And maybe regulations hadn't caught up with them yet. They have 20 complaints for, let's say, a particular type of product. And then somebody would invest with that product, and then they would have the same problem. So I think a background check is one of the biggest mistakes that people make. They just go off people what they said. And one of the things that really bothered me was there was a somebody who claimed to be a CPA, and he wasn't. He was not licensed at all, and
That's illegal, right, to do that?
yeah, it was
Yeah.
illegal, and eventually he faced some ramifications with
Mhm.
criminal authorities. But he hurt a lot of people in the process, right? And that really bothered me. But what could the investor have done to really prevent that? Right. So in retrospect, in hindsight's always 2020, right? If you took a few minutes and looked, okay, is he really a CPA, right? You can look up with the state licensing board. Well, he
Mm.
lied about that, right? So that's one simple background check that those people could have done, for example, to prevent 100% loss. And another thing would be the thing that we just talked about, looking up, does this person have complaints? Is it somebody who I should trust? And so that's another quick check that it could have been done that could have alerted a red flag, if you will,
Mhm.
to the person to say, okay, maybe this isn't somebody that I want to deal with. And so some things cannot be anticipated. If the person had no complaints, they're valid licenses, they have a good performance record, maybe there was nothing that you could have done. Maybe, there was no red flags. So then the last piece is diversification, but not just diversification amongst investments.
Mhm.
What about diversifying amongst custodians? Right. So, for example, like I have some of my money at one independent custodian, I have some of my money at another independent custodian. And now you've diversified against risks that it doesn't even have to be fraud per se. It could be just somebody has financial trouble and it wasn't anticipated. Right. So, I think there's a lot of things that people can do where I've seen mistakes made where they could have prevented themselves or prevented the problem. So again, there goes to being aware of red flags. An ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, like Benjamin Franklin said, right? And so that was actually part of the motivation for writing this book was I really wanted to help people in the sense of if I can just get some of this knowledge into people's hands and if they can avoid that, then that money can be used for good. They
Mhm.
can use it for their kids. They can use it for their communities. They can donate it to charity, whatever, but instead of being wasted. And so that was one of my motivations for writing the book. And I really hope that it will achieve that end.
Yeah. Last question for you. So, when someone looks at their financial picture, what how would you, guide them on how they should measure their financial progress? If they're not, they shouldn't be measuring by their income because, somebody could have a very high income and be making, be spending it all on cars and, um, shopping and material things. So how should people measure their financial progress when they look at, today, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, like, what are some road markers, along the way?
Okay. So the interesting thing about STAR is it is the diagnostic tool and the map all in one. So savings, time, asset returns. And you can look at all the pieces and kind of figure out where you are. I kind of think of it like a hiker in the wilderness. How can you figure out where you're going if you don't know where you are on that map? And so you need to like look at what are my savings? What am I capable of saving? Do I have anything that's not necessary? And how much time do I have before I need the money? And then we get into the investment horizon. How many assets do I really have? Can I shift some of those assets from non-productive assets to productive assets? Like maybe you got a boat, and I've been there. I wanted a boat, I wanted the Corvette or whatever, right? And so shifting that from to something that's actually earning money for you, it's bringing in money. And so it's like I said, STAR is the diagnostic tool and the map
Mhm.
all in one. But I think there's more here, and you kind of touched on like how do you measure progress? And so one of the things in the book that I kind of touch on is okay. So there's materialism, right? We have he who dies with the most toys wins. There's that line of thinking, but in
Mhm.
reality, who dies with the most toys still dies. And so, two people with the same net worth have a totally different life experience. And so, wealth can feel heavy or it can feel light. And I really love the name of your podcast here, Finding Freedom, because here we go. What is freedom? It's the
Mhm.
freedom to have choices. So I would say cash flow is a far better measure of how you're doing than whether you've got that boat or the car or the fancy car, right? Or the vacation home that's not being rented out. And Lao Tzu had a quote that I really like, and I recently encountered it was, he who is contented is rich. And so we can feel grateful for what we've had, for what we have, and still want more and still have those goals set for the future.
Mhm.
But I think that it's important to just appreciate what we have so you can enjoy the journey because we really never know how much time we have. So it would be a shame to always be striving for, oh, I want to be a billionaire, right? But then you pass away before you quite got there, but really never enjoyed the journey. And
Mhm.
so my wife has been a great influence in this area in that she's always encouraged me to let's go travel and let's go enjoy something while we're still young. And I think that's really important. It's not just about how much you have, but does it offer you the freedom and the lifestyle that you want? Um, and strive for more, strive for having those better things, but enjoy the journey while you're in the process.
Absolutely. Great advice, and I love what you talked about at the very end there with, your wife helping you out with it, being able to enjoy life, 'cause there's people out there who maybe they have the high-paying job or they're running a massive business, but they get so locked into that life, that business, that job that they don't stop to actually take time to enjoy their life, and like you alluded to, that's a big part of this show, and one of the reasons why I started this show in the first place was to help people find freedom in their financial life. So this has been an awesome show, Edward. I appreciate you coming on. I know the book comes out in July, right? How can people order the book?
So it's going to be available on Amazon in multiple formats on Kindle. It's going to be available in softcover and hardcover, and ultimately it'll be available on Audible. After that, in a few months after that, so in July, that'll be basically Amazon will be the way you can get it. And then a few months after that, we plan to release it into bookstores. And so it'll be
Awesome.
available any way you want it. But in July, basically Amazon.
All right. Edward, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Have a great day.
All right, guys, that is a wrap for today's episode of Finding Freedom. I will see you all next week with another great interview. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe. Be sure to leave us a nice 5-star review with a comment, and share this episode with a friend. Share it with someone who maybe could use some help with their finances, and maybe could benefit from reading Edward Brady's book. So hopefully you guys got as much out of today's episode that I got out of it. And if you did, please consider supporting the show. I'll see y'all next week. In the meantime, keep on moving.